Nobody thought the Fever were going to do this. Not even the people that were highest on Kelly Kreskoff and Amber Cox. Nobody thought the Fever were going to do.
When the Indiana Fever selected Caitlin Clark as the first overall pick, they went all out to create a championship-caliber team around her. However, are these new additions sufficient to make the Fever serious title contenders? And did they just put together one of the most dangerous offensive lineups in WNBA history? The Indiana Fever just made one of the biggest roster moves in WNBA history.
The Indiana Fever continued to make massive moves in free agency, signing Sophie Cunningham and DeWanna Bonner. And you guys, I don't even think they're done.
Stick around because the Fever's latest signings are shaking up the league in a way nobody saw coming. The Indiana Fever are no longer just a rebuilding team. They are making a statement. They are here to win now. With the selection of Caitlin Clark as the number 1 overall pick, they knew they had something special. But what separates a franchise-altering player from just another great talent is the team built around them, and the Fever wasted no time making sure Clark wasn't walking into a roster that would leave her carrying too much of the burden alone. This is how dynasties are built. You get your superstar, and then you surround them with the right mix of veteran specialists and rising stars who complement their game perfectly. That's exactly what Indiana has done, and honestly, it's one of the most aggressive and strategic roster overhauls we've seen in the WNBA in a long time. The Fever knew that if they wanted Clark to succeed, they had to do more than just hope for natural team chemistry. They had to construct a team that played to her strengths while also covering up her weaknesses. They had to give her players who could stretch the floor, defend at an elite level, and handle the physicality of the WNBA. They weren't just building a roster, they were building an identity. And that's why this offseason has been so historic. Even the greatest shooters in history require the right players around them. Take Stephen Curry, who succeeds because he plays with elite defenders, versatile scorers, and high IQ teammates who know how to complement his game. They needed to provide Clark with the same kind of support, which is where their aggressive free agency moves and trades come in. Caitlin Clark is already a superstar, as we know. Her ability to shoot from anywhere on the floor, pass like a seasoned pro, and handle defensive pressure is on another level.
Into it. So firstly, you guys, Sophie Cunningham was traded to the Indiana Fever for Nalissa Smith and a pick. The Indiana Fever also acquired forward Jaylen Brown, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, I am not familiar with her game. She is going to be only a second-year WNBA player, so we will have to see how her game translates to the Indiana Fever. But Sophie Cunningham was such a huge...
Then there's the defensive aspect of things. Everyone knows Clark is an offensive machine, but defense has never been her forte. She's the type of player who gets under the opponent's skin, brings fire to the game, and thrives in big moments. Her energy alone alters the game's tempo, and when you combine that with her ability to drain threes, it's obvious why the Fever wanted her next to Clark. Natasha Howard and Dananna Boner are two elite veteran defenders who can guard multiple positions and provide the kind of toughness and experience that young teams need, because the WNBA is a physical league and guards who can't hold their own defensively get targeted quickly. The Fever weren't going to let that happen. The Indiana Fever's pursuit of a championship has advanced significantly with the signing of Natasha Howard, who has helped the team win 3 straight titles. WNBA champion, All-Star, Defensive Player of the Year, and veteran with over 3,300 games played, Natasha Howard's signing with the Indiana Fever also signifies a comeback for her. Being a former WNBA Defensive Player of the Year, Howard instantly lends the team a defensive identity. She is a long, agile, disruptive player who can shut down wings, shield the paint, and maybe switch to smaller guards when necessary. That's just the kind of assistance Clark requires.
She gets the steal and the N1 opportunity.
And injecting passion and emotion into the game and into her team. On offense, Cunningham is a floor spacer and a deep shot.
With these additions, the Fever didn't just add talent. They added identity. They are now a team that can run the floor, shoot the lights out, defend at an elite level, and physically dominate opponents. Let's not forget about how this roster now makes Caitlin Clark even more dangerous before these moves. Boner, on the other hand, is a matchup nightmare. She's a scoring machine who can also lock down on defense, but more importantly, she's a winner. She's played on teams of championship caliber, and she knows what it takes to win at the highest level. Clark was already a nightmare for matches. With players like Cunningham and Kelsey Mitchell slicing the floor, she now has even more room to move. Defenders will need to decide whether to double Clark and leave a shooter open or play her straight up and risk her dropping 30 on them. Defenders couldn't sag off because she could blow past them, but they also couldn't guard her too closely because she could pull up from the logo and drain a three. There isn't a suitable response, but this lineup's true strength is that it wasn't created just for offensive purposes years ago. One of the main complaints about Clark's teams at Iowa was that they relied too much on outscoring opponents. If the offense wasn't clicking, they were in trouble. The Fever ensured that wouldn't be the case in Indiana with Howard and Boner, as this team can lock down defensively and create turnovers that lead to transition offense. And if there's one thing we know about Clark, it's that she is deadly in transition. Give her an open floor and she'll tear down defenses in seconds. The Fever also needed to add toughness, and they did just that. You need players like Sophie Cunningham in a locker room. Players who set the tone, who don't back down, who push their team to play with intensity every night. And let's not forget about Aaliyah, because she is one of the league's toughest players. She plays with an edge, isn't afraid to get physical, and brings an attitude that motivates her teammates. Boston is already a dominant force in the paint, and now she has even more help. Last season, she was carrying a massive load inside. Now, with Howard and Boner taking on defensive responsibilities, she can focus more on scoring, rebounding, and anchoring the paint without having to do everything herself. That alone makes her even more dangerous. This is what a franchise-changing offseason looks like. The Fever didn't just add pieces, they built a team that makes sense. They found players who fit together, who bring different skills to the table, and who complement Caitlin Clark perfectly. And what's scary, they're not even done yet. This is just the beginning of what could be one of the greatest team transformations in WNBA history. The Fever aren't just trying to be good, they're building something special. And with Clark leading the way, they might just be unstoppable. The Fever have completely transformed their identity, and with Caitlin Clark at the center of it all, they're poised to become one of the most exciting and competitive teams in the WNBA. But let's not get it twisted. This isn't just about throwing a bunch of talent together and hoping it works. Indiana has built this team with intention, thinking about how each player fits next to Clark, and more importantly, how they can turn this team into a serious title compete as soon as possible. The Fever has sped up the schedule by bringing in seasoned players who understand how to win and are no longer seeing this to be a multi-year rebuild. It's no longer a question of whether the Fever will be competitive. Rather, it's a question of how soon they can rise to the top of the league. And let's discuss why this team is ideal for Clark's skill set. They have shooters who will keep the floor open and defenders who will keep Clark from being continuously targeted on that end of the floor. At Iowa, Clark frequently faced double and triple teams because opposing teams knew they could afford to collapse on her without worrying about strong secondary scoring threats, which won't happen in Indiana with tight defensive schemes. First, spacing is everything. We've seen what happens when Clark plays in an offense where she has the freedom to move, pass, and score without being trapped in tight defensive schemes. Mitchell, Kelsey, Diana Boner, and Sophie Cunningham. Now that the Fever have several three-point threats, defenses must be honest, because if they try to blitz Clark, they're opening the door for a lethal shooter, and Clark, being the outstanding passer that she is, will always make them pay. With this explosive lineup, Clark is not only a scorer, but also a master playmaker. Her court vision, her ability to manipulate defenses with her passing, and her talent for setting up teammates are what really set her apart. She doesn't have to do everything herself. She can move off the ball, set up teammates, and pick her spots without constantly being the center of every defensive scheme, which will only increase her danger.
The Fever are showing that they want that ring now, because they have just signed Diana Bonner to the Indiana Fever for the 2025 season.
Consider how Steph Curry and other players have been handled by the greatest shooters in basketball history. It was a wise move for Indiana to add multiple ball handlers and scoring options around Clark, because she is just as deadly running off screens, spotting up for open threes, and using her elite handle to create separation for quick pull-ups. Now, when Clark isn't handling the ball, the Fever still have multiple players who can initiate offense, move the ball, and keep defenses scrambling. Diana Taurasi and Sabrina Ionescu thrive in systems where they aren't just primary ball handlers. they are also off-ball threats. Ignore the implications of these actions for Aaliyah. Boston, she entered the league as a dominant force in the paint, a rim protector, and a player who could take over games when necessary, but Boston was frequently double-teamed because Indiana lacked enough perimeter threats to accept the pressure offer that comes with Clark commanding so much attention on the perimeter. Boston was the heart and soul of this Fever team last season. Boston will continue to dominate inside and have more opportunities for easy baskets, whether it's through drop passes from Clark or just taking advantage of teams having to focus on defending the perimeter. Boston is now in the ideal position. She will have more one-on-one games, much more space to operate in the paint, and even more offensive weaponry because teams won't be able to clog the lane against her. This is the essence of championship-level team building, but what's even more amazing is that the Fever are laying a foundation that will last for years by bringing in seasoned veterans who can serve as mentors and advisors. Players like Boner and Howard bring leadership, playoff experience, and a winning mentality that will help mold the team into one that isn't just competitive for 1 or 2 seasons, but for many years to come. Don't undervalue the impact that having these types of personalities in the locker room can have on a team's culture. Clark and Boston are making sure that this young core isn't just learning how to play at the WNBA level, but also how to win at the WNBA level. Someone who has participated in important postseason games and knows what it takes to be the best in a matter of months. They went from being a bottom feeder team with potential to a franchise that's making all the right moves to set themselves up for sustained success. And let's be honest, the entire WNBA is watching this team very closely with the way Clark has already taken over the headlines. Howard is a defensive anchor who will set the tone for how hard this team plays every single night, and Cunningham is the firecracker, the gritty competitor who will do all the little things to ignite this team's energy when they need it most. The Fever will soon be among the league's most watched teams. They will receive more national television appearances, attract larger audiences, and be the subject of an absurd amount of attention each and every night. The good news is that this roster is prepared to handle the pressure. With more weapons, more support, and more experience surrounding her than ever before, Clark is accustomed to playing in the spotlight, carrying a team, and delivering in critical situations. The Fever aren't just looking to be competitive, they're looking to dominate, and with this roster, they might.